going to do a regression in a moment. We're going to talk about how to do a regression. And regression is great for letting go of sadness, fear, etc. Because what's happening when we're little kids? Something shocking happens. We don't know what it is, right? And we don't know how to deal with it. We don't know how to cope with it. So, strong emotions end up coming up. Now, we know as adults that the same situation right now really wouldn't faze us. Okay? If I'm going to use you, Dave, because just as a lovely example of it. If, as adults, we're feeding a cat at 10 o'clock at night, and 10 comes out, we look out and there's eyes, you go, there's a cat, right? It's not as shocking as it is for a 10-year-old boy, 8-year-old boy, who has to walk through the dark to get there. So it's already building an atmosphere of like whatever, right? It's different for us because we're older, we're wiser, and if nothing else, we're bigger and stronger, right? So it's not the same impact for us. The problem is, there's a little part of us that's still that little kid that's still carrying around that fear and the intention behind it, which is protection, and it's not smart enough to realize that there's other ways of doing it. You are, but that part isn't, because remember we talked about the whole thing bouncing off on the outside, right? So our job is to get the wisdom that you now have and get into the point where the things that are, if like, causing problems for you, either emotionally or behaviorally, well, that wisdom is attached onto that in a way that you can actually change. So you can actually do the logical thing. Because if you think about it, there's a lot of things that you do that you'd rather wish you didn't, and you know that logically what the solution is, right? But can you bring yourself to do it? Not really. Because if you could, well, you had done it already. And those are the things you didn't think about anymore. So at that point, that shows you that something inside you needs to attach a resource. In other words, a bit of wisdom, a bit of an insight, just feeling in different ways that you didn't have at the time available to you. Do you kind of see how that works? Now, here's kind of what happens, primarily to kids. It can happen to later on as well in really traumatic situations, but this is really the kind of the trauma model. You have a strong, this time it's a negative experience, right? And the problem is, because it's such a negative, strong and negative experience, a boundary gets built up around it. Remember we had the negative thing here. That boundary is designed to protect it, to seal it off from the rest of the person, so it doesn't have to deal with it yet, because it can't. So you either forget about it, or you put it to one side, and you get on with life, which is useful at the time. But this thing kind of has its own little path, and it keeps growing on its own without the rest of your resource, the rest of your knowledge, right? And what happens here is, this negative thing, when it gets to the end, loops back in and does the negative version of what you just did with your partners. So you just looped a positive experience, they're looping a negative experience. They're going from a point of fear to a point of fear. And they can't get out of it. Because whenever they think about the situation, there are such strong boundaries on either side, they can't get out. So of course the energy is going to be contained and get stronger and stronger. So that over a period of time, of course, a trigger can actually become, create a panic attack, and you don't even know why anymore. See how that works? But there's a solution. Any ideas what that might be?
You replace one of the negatives with a positive, so that the positive feeds that negative and switches it, flips it back.
You actually do two positive. You now create a moment of safety on either end. So the energy goes from a safe point to a safe point. So now you can release the fear, the anger, the sadness, frustration, whatever it is. It can actually be released because it's got somewhere to go. Because it normally fades anyway, right? It's just that this part doesn't know it because it was too contained. So your job is to create a place of safety on either end so it can run the loop and release the energy. It can be quite dramatic sometimes, and sometimes it seems like, is that all it was? You never can tell ahead of time. Does that make sense to you guys? Now, think of it in terms of this. You can do exactly the same thing, only this time, this early moment here, beforehand, is just a safe place instead of boredom. Then you add a safe place at the other end, so it doesn't get left in like trailing off to like a whatever end. He knows he starts safe, he knows he finishes safe. Anyone ever have something really bad happen to you when you were young? Only 2 people? God, you guys are so lucky. Now, let me take a guess. If you can even remember any of those events, whilst you're in it, does it feel like you'll never get out? Like this will never end? You think you're finished, it's over now, right? That's what kids feel because they have no reference experience to know better. As an adult, at least this will pass. It'll go away. I know because I've had this happen enough times that you have reference experiences, right? But kids don't. That's why you don't get traumatized and they do. Because you do this automatically through experience. But of course, if you have a little part of you already sealed off from where you're young, that's just doing this anyway, it needs to learn what you've already learned. Do you see what we're talking about here? So it's not a question of, is the fear good or bad? Is the anger good or bad? Is this sensation good or bad? It's nothing to do with that. It's just a question of, has it served its purpose? Well, yes it has, because you're still alive, right? Do you still need it? Well, usually no. They come to see you because they don't need it anymore. If they still needed it, they wouldn't come and see you in the first place, right? And can you do something about it? Sure. So now let's imagine you take them back. You have a negative experience. Let's go for the classic one, which is fear. Most things kind of end up in fear some way or other anyway, right? But there's going to be a mixture of things. So you have fear, you bounce back through 3 or 4 reference experiences, you get to the first time they ever experienced that kind of fear. Because there's different kinds of fear, right? So the first time they experienced that kind of fear. Now, what do? You go back to the adult. Why? The adult's not afraid. The adult knows better, right? The adult isn't afraid of all these little things. To use it again as an example, just because it's a good reference point, you were never afraid of turtles, were you? No. Right? Turtles, cats, similar size. Turtles kind of freak you with little beaky things. You can install a phobia now. Right? Not afraid of turtles. Afraid of dogs? No. But dogs are worse. Dogs can bite you. Like, the cats are so small, even if they bite you, like, they can't even get through your genes, right? But dogs are worse. But you're not afraid of them. Why? Because you grew up with the resources you needed for them, around them. But not with a cat. Because that was kind of like split off. So what you do now is, here's adult James, whatever you want to call him. And he knows about this experience. And he also knows something the little kid doesn't know. And what's that? That it's going to happen, and it's going to make it through okay. That it's going to be okay. What is the one thing you want to hear when you're a child and you're afraid? Right? Do you do that with kids if they're afraid? Have you ever done that? And then they just go, okay, I'll trust you, and then it's fine. Has it ever happened to you when you were young? Someone said, it'll be okay, right? And suddenly, when you trusted it, the fear went away, right? The experience could still be bad, but the fear went away. Here's a classic example. Kids go to a doctor, has a jab, right? Do they like it? No. But if they know it's going to be okay, that the pain will go away, they'll go, fine. And sometimes they don't even notice the pain anymore. So it's all about what are your reference experiences. So now you're going to put a place of safety and a place of safety either end. But he gets to choose it because he knows it, right? Go ahead, David.
I want to ask a quick question before we get, cause this is all great stuff, and I love it. The discrete negatives at the beginning and end of the event. I mean, we're talking about a specific event, right? How do those, like, is it just the point where it begins being negative and stops being negative? How do they get, are those triggers themselves, or are they negatively?
It's the correct answer to that is, I don't think anyone really knows. But in terms of your experience, it's easy to tell. Can you think of something that happened to you as a child, but even if you think about it now, you're a little afraid or a little shaken by it? Just a little bit. Okay? So what happens if you think, all right, make it even easier. Can you think of something that's happened in your life, which even now when you think about it, makes you feel somehow negatively? Yeah? Okay, you don't have to tell us what it is, but you've got that, right? Where do you go in your memory? Do you go to the beginning of the event, the end of the event, just before, just after it, or right into the middle of it?
Can I go into the middle?
Exactly. You go right there. And that's the problem. Somehow, you've created a boundary in there, so when you think about the experience, you don't think about what happened before, or the fact that you were okay before. You don't think about afterwards, and the fact that you were okay afterwards. You think about the middle of it, and the fact that you weren't. Now, as a contrast, think about an experience that was bad at the time, but it's just totally fine now. Anyone can think of that? That's probably a better one for the group to do rather than getting you all to freak out. You think of an experience that when you think about it now, it's totally fine, but at the time was negative. Everyone? Where does your mind go? To the end? Or the whole experience? Or the beginning? So do you get a sense of more overview? Or do you go right into the middle of like the action? Or do you get like a more sense of an overview of the whole thing in context? Or maybe to the end when it's actually cleared up and it's fine, right? What have you done? You've done this. That's why it's not a problem. Do you see what we're doing here? We're just recreating the same conditions inside someone else. That's all. Does that answer your question?
It's beautiful, thanks.
So what do? You've got the negative emotion. They're gonna be in this, so depending on how strong this is, they may well be crying, they may well be going, oh, this is terrible, whatever. You still need to orient them to this, so you get some informational labels on this, so you find out where those parameters are. You have to know when they're in it, right? Then you bring them out. As the adult, they're not going to be afraid anymore because they're dissociated. They're away from it. They're in the same position that Dave was in when he could look at the picture of cats and be okay with it, but wasn't quite okay with actually touching them. So you're dissociated, you're okay with it, you don't have to have the feelings, but there's still something going on. Make sense? Now, he knows that they made it through and that he wasn't always in trouble. So he knows what happened immediately before. That might have been 5 minutes before. Now, let's give an example of this specifically. Let's say classic thing, you're in the playground, dog jumps up at you, overexcited, snaps in your face, instant fear reaction, builds into a phobia, right? Now, as an adult, you know that before that dog actually jumped and snapped, like say 5 minutes before, you were sitting on the swings having the time of your life. You're safe. You know this, right? You also know that, say, 10, 15 minutes later, once you've running home to mommy and she's kissed you on the forehead and it's all better, that you're safe again. And you're calm and all is good. You know this because it's happened already, right? So you get Big James or Big Andy or Big Bertha or whoever to tell you what are these 2 moments in time, specific moments, exactly as you did just now. Find specific moments, specific details. With James, it was coloring in books half an hour before. That's a specific moment in time when we know it's happened, right? You've done it all now. It's simple to do, right? You can do the same at the end. So now you have the makings of your loop, safety to safety. Make sense? So the first thing you've got to do is connect these 2 up. You've got to connect these 2 up before you can start taking away the negative beliefs and attitudes, etc., that people build up as a result of this. You connect them up. Go ahead.
I just am sitting here kind of concerned about trying to do this experiment in a little while, or this exercise, and then having somebody that has post-traumatic stress disorder or went through something that was an adult experience over a period of time, and I'm just trying to figure out.
I tell you, don't need to jump ahead. You won't have to actually do this. And the reason I'm saying this is because this is not the appropriate context to do it. You've actually done the hard work already, which is the regression and the loops within it. You know how to set all those things up, right? You've done it. I just want you to understand how do you use what you can do already to get change. And I think that's an appropriate thing. And remember, by the way, if someone has post-traumatic stress disorder, you have to learn how to do it somewhere. You have to learn how to be totally somewhere. And chances are it wasn't there yet. So chances are, why is it that 2 soldiers can go through the exact same experience, one gets it, one doesn't? It's because one of them has something that's happened earlier on already that can be built on, and that just gets released in a big way during that. And that's what you end up releasing. But not here, because this is not necessarily the right context for you to do this. But if someone comes to you for it, you've got to know how to deal with it, right?
Right. So that's my next, I guess, concern is it just this process here?
That's what I would do. That's my starting point, absolutely. Let's just pause this model for a moment, and I'll show you how to use this in a minute, if I may. I'll give you a sense of how I think something like post-traumatic stress disorders actually gets created. Now, let me just say this right now. I don't know this for a fact. Right? I do not know this for a fact. But this is how I would deal with it and what I would do. And, oh, go ahead. Over here we have someone. And I actually don't think that anyone knows what happens for a fact. We just know certain trends. Go ahead.
I would like to confirm what you're saying because I had a suicide that I had to deal with at work, and I dealt with it really bad because my mom tried to commit suicide. So everyone else that was there with me, when I cut the guy down, the good part about it is the guy lived, okay? So why should I have emotions attached to it? And everyone else saw the same thing. We thought he was dead. He was hanging. We cut him down. He ended up living. So that's the good part. But I'm just confirming that it wasn't that event. It was something else that created all the other stuff that came with it.
Thank you. And I honestly believe that that's how things like post-traumatic stress disorders get created. I don't know it for a fact. I don't think anyone knows it for a fact. But what I think has happened goes right back. Do you remember our little reality tunnel? Right? Something small happens here. Maybe not so small. Something scary. Let's say you're a kid and the kids in the local neighborhood stick you in a dumpster and then roll it down the hill and you're freaking out. It's kind of scary, right? Sure. I mean, it happens. So now, reference experience happen, something else like that. And maybe even not that many things happen in life, just one or two things that scare you a little bit, but brings a little bit of that thing back, but nothing major. Now, you hit a war zone. What's happening all around you? It's lights, it's flashes, it's bangs, it's being shaken around, it's confusion. It's kind of the same experience you had in that dustbin rolling down the hill, but just like on steroids and then some, right? So what does your mind do? It goes, okay, I've got to make sense of this. This is what I had then, and that's what we're going to have now, just more so. So that's the loop you've now created. Does that kind of make sense? Now, the person who never got rolled down the hill, the one who actually was doing the rolling, he's fine. I mean, not fine. He's still stressed, and it's still scary, and there's still emotions that need to be dealt with, but he doesn't get post-traumatic stress disorder because there's nothing in his past that can link to. Go ahead.
Actually, this post-traumatic stress disorder happens to be something that I have more training in than, although I'm trained in general surgery, but this happens to be one particular area because I served with the 5th Special Forces Group and also with the 2nd Infantry Division Group. And one of the things was the training that we had to go through with the Combat Casualty Care Course was this issue about post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's exactly what you said because it's the repetition that the soldier sees of his friend being blown up and the next friend being blown up and the third one. Post-traumatic stress disorder doesn't occur after one event. It's the repetitious evidence or the repetitious visualization of what's occurred that builds upon each other, just like you said. So when you were drawing these two circles, the positive and the positive circle, actually that's exactly where my mind went to the example of post-traumatic stress disorder. That, wait a second, you could then fix it if you could change those two references.
That's exactly what we're doing. Now, does that answer your question? And thank you for sharing that, because as I say, I haven't got experience in that specific field, but just by looking at the literature and what people are doing, this is what makes sense to me. And thank you for confirming it from your own experience as well. Go ahead.
And the one thing I just checked with him, I said these repetitive experiences can happen in a very close period of time. So it doesn't have to be over a long period of time.
You can see the same trauma occur 3 times in a half-hour period.
Exactly.
And that's actually going to be worse because now it's framed that every time I hear that incoming round, one of my friends is going to lose a leg. And so the third time, it's pretty much, they can hear it always.
So what do we do with that? It's kind of major things, right? Well, if you create, rather than being stuck in the middle of this, you create this context. And by the way, even though the triggering event is here, lots of little, but pretty gruesome things happening, I would still go back here, because that's where they first learned about what it means to have fear or panic attacks, something like that. And once this is clear, in other words, once they can handle the initial thing, then you can deal with the other ones piece by piece, and now they have a resource. Just in the same way as they had a problem that got activated a little bit, and more until the whole thing happens. You now have a resource, you can deal with it, get through it, and that makes dealing with each one of these easier until the whole group becomes like, okay, it's the thing that happened, but I'm safe now, and it's over. I don't have to keep reliving it.
Am I hearing you right then in saying that, maybe not in all cases, but in a lot of cases, the learning takes place maybe in childhood before the critical factor is even online? So it's like in a way, a kind of hypnotic learning that takes place right in childhood, and then that, because the critical factor isn't there, then there's nothing to protect it.
So this is called the imprint stage, 0 to 7 years. is called the imprint stage. It's basically where a child's mind just absorbs everything. Technically, it doesn't absorb everything. A child will borrow the critical factor of its parents and view through that. If the parents agree, they'll agree. If the parents disagree, they may well disagree. Sometimes it doesn't happen quite that way, but that's roughly what happens. So most of our reference experiences that end up becoming bigger later in life happen there. So this is what you want to clear up first of all. Once they have a resource there, that can be applied here, and that's part of the test phase. Remember, there's nothing more than clear it up as one event, and then test, 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 test. So it's the same structure what you did before. It's just something, it's a bigger event, so it may take you one session to do this, one session to that one, another session to that one. But then after 3 or 4 sessions, you still pretty much have it, right? It's the same structure, you're just expanding it to fit the context and the intensity of it so people can have a rest in between, because they can't do it all in one go, necessarily. Well, sometimes they can, but does that make sense?
Yes, great. Thanks.
Okay. Was there someone else with a hand there? Okay, so let's just go through the whole sequence, just so you have a sense of how it is, so you get a sense of it, and then we'll go to lunch and you can think about that, and then we'll come back. Okay, guys? So the beginning of the sequence is the same. You find the emotion. That'll be easy because they're coming in it, probably. Or in terms of the pattern we're doing here, remember, conversational pattern 2, the mind-bending language, is going to fail, or it's hardest to use, which is when people think it's failing, when there's a strong emotion blocking it, a strong negative emotion, right? Well, that's your instant signal to the regression, because it's there already, it's live. Do you see how that works? It's just the thing that makes number 2 fail makes number 3 succeed, right? So you have a strong emotion, you bounce back on it, you go back to somewhere in the imprint stage, and then you get to the adult and say, hey, you know that was pretty hard, right? You want to get a little bit of rapport here, just like, hey, it's no big deal. Why are you so troubled about it? Not good. Hey, you know that was a hard, pretty hard deal for that little kid to deal with, right? You want to get them on your side. But you also know something he doesn't know. And they go, what? You know you made it through. You're here, you're still alive, and you're doing pretty well, considering, right? But he doesn't know that yet. So, can you tell me about a time just before that happened, when he was totally safe, before he even realized even the beginnings of the whole problem started, before even the lead into it began, he was totally safe. I mean, where would that be? And he says, oh, well, playground, swing on the swings. Well, you also know that there's a time immediately afterwards when it was all over and there was nothing left. He'd forgotten all about it. When was that? Oh, that's maybe like 20 minutes later, half an hour later, an hour later, at home, watching TV with a bowl of ice cream that his mum gave him to feel better, right? So now you have these 2 events. Now comes something very important. Now you can link them as an event. Remember, the unconscious works by association, so he has to link it in some way. So you send them back into the safety and get them really experience safety, really go to town on how safe it is here. You can zip them through this back into safety. Now, if it's not too strong an emotion, in other words, they can handle it reasonably well, you can take it through relatively real time, or as real as they want. If it's a really strong emotion, then zip it through to the end as quickly as possible so that they go from safety to safety, and those are the 2 things that are dominant in the mind. Does that make sense? Now, the important thing is, the kid does not yet expect this to happen. That's part of what you want with the links. You just zip it all the way through. The adult knows it, but the kid doesn't yet. He just has safety, and those are the things that are stuck in his mind. Make sense? Now, you can condition it. And now, you can actually change the memory a little bit in the sense that you can have the same interaction. Adult, coaching, child, saying, hey, I want you to know something. In a moment, something unpleasant is going to happen. You can even actually tell them what it is. People are going to come, and they're going to stick you in a thing, and they're going to roll you down, and you're probably going to feel like you're not going to make it through, right? And I want you to know that you will. Whatever happens, I'll be there with you, and you'll make it through, and you'll be just fine. So you basically say whatever that little kid needs to hear, to first of all know it's going to happen, because it is, but also to know he's going to make it through, which is the one thing he doesn't know. Does that make sense? So you really get a good coaching chat here. You want to build the emotions up in the adult, the protective instinct, and I think someone came up to me earlier on and mentioned that they had a slightly a positive experience with something slightly negative within it, and their instinct was, I want to mentor that kid and say it's going to be all right. I understand it. It's a natural instinct. So use it, right? Use it and load it up with a positive, protective sense of emotion, because that's going to be part of the intention that gets transferred here. And that's going to be part of what colors this, right? Now, you step back inside and do exactly the same again. Now, he's going to start with a place of safety, zip through, back to the place of safety. Now, typically what will happen is a significant amount of emotion will have already evaporated the first time around. A significant amount. Sometimes even get to the point, in London we did this, and a guy actually turned around and said, well, it actually feels pretty exciting now. It feels good doing this, because he had much more control of the whole thing. Go ahead, Lenny.
When you're doing this with kids, my daughter is 9 years old and she has a fear of dogs. Can I try then to get her go back as a 9-year-old and tell her little child from 3-year-old?
Sure. And I mean, first of all, you can do it with mind. I'd probably start with mind-bending language a little bit just to see all this imagery. You can actually do a regression as well on younger children. Now, the question is, does she have the resources now? Probably does. In which case, it works exactly the same way. You may want to add some of your own as well, especially in this sort of stage here. You may add some of like, hey, I'm your mother, I'm here with you. Now you tell her that both of us are going to look after her.
Okay,
that's
so you can bring the mother
sure.
or the father in.
You can
help.
bring other resources in here too.
Okay.
Basically, the key here is you want this kid to have the courage to do this, and know it's all going to be fine.
Yeah.
So now they're choosing, this is important, they're choosing to do the event. They're choosing to get into it rather than having it forced onto them, which is an empowering thing. Does that make sense?
I think I might be really getting this now because I've got a question which almost seems a silly question to ask, but I think it needs to be asked. The positive safety zones that you're creating, it's probably very, very crucial to orient them to those two.
Yes.
Okay.
You want to have specific details about those so that you can build them up, you can revivify them when you need to, because that's what's going to be the strongest in their mind at the end of the whole experience. Now, the experience becomes, oh, yeah, it's that time when it's that time I got through okay, rather than that time I got stuck, right? Like you guys experienced just now, that time where, you see the whole thing is like, yeah, it was unpleasant in there, but the whole thing is okay because I know it now, right? So, go ahead, Wendy.
So if you're looking for a place of safety in the past and a place of safety that you know now, what if the thing that happened in the past, that person has never felt safe since because of what happened?
Well, they might think that intellectually, but it can't be true because the experience will have disappeared. Now, they might still have lots of other things going on, right? But the event that's kind of dramatic will have come to an end. Even let's take something really harsh, right? Let's take sexual abuse, right?
That's what we're referring to.
Right. So you have a parent coming in, violating the child, and then leaving. So the parent has left at some point. Or it hasn't been a parent or whoever it is. So he left at some point. And somehow the child pulled themselves together again, enough to be able to go to school, chat to their friends, and be reasonably okay with it. So they survived it. Right? Now, I'm not saying this is like the best thing in the world. They're not like yay, I'm going to be happy again. Not necessarily. But that event has gone. It's finished. So it's finite. And that's the thing that they need to realize, that it doesn't last forever. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So, you having this sorry, was there another? Go. Sorry?
Yeah, this phase, right? So you go with the adult together with the child, you bring them through, right? Together?
At this stage here or this stage here?
That stage.
So that this is now, the adult is the one you're talking to. And you're telling the adult, you're coaching the adult to say, go ahead and coach the child and explain to him what's going to happen. Explain to him that in a moment, he's going to start off in a very safe place, it's going to be all fine. And then something's going to happen. The dog's going to jump up, and it's going to be startled, and it's going to seem like it's the end, but he'll get through it. You'll be fine. I want you to know you'll be fine. And at the end of it, you'll be sitting, watching TV and eating your ice cream, and forget all about it. Right? So, and you really, that person has to tell that person exactly what he needs to know to be able to do this. Now, it might be enough to say you'll be getting through it. It might be say, I know you've got courage. Remember the time when, little Billy kicked you in the shins and you stood up for yourself? Well, you can do it here too. Just have that courage and you can do it. So you basically give me a pep talk, right? If you need more resources, you're a hypnotist. Add more resources until this kid has got what it takes to go from safety to safety and be okay with it. Does that make sense? Now, with each round that you do, I'll come over in a second, with each round that you do, more and more the negative charge gets dissolved until it becomes just an event. Think about something unpleasant that happened to you in your past, that when you think about it now, it's just like, whatever. Right? It happened, and it just happened. Right? It's got no charge left, because this happened automatically, or from your own thoughts at the time, that happened automatically. Does that make sense? There's another question over here somewhere. Go ahead.
What I was wondering is, if you've got a situation where a traumatic event happened on more than one occasion, would it be theoretically possible for you to go to the safety zone before the first event, and then cycle through to the last event and the safety zone after that, and literally get them to go from one straight across to the other?
Well, I would do it in this case if they're very close in time. If they're further apart in time, I do them individually, because otherwise they overload, which is part of the reason they have a problem, because they're trying to deal with too many things at the same time. Go back to the idea of a Roman therapy: divide and conquer. Take as small a piece as possible that you can totally obliterate, and when you've conquered that, that becomes your staging post for the next piece and the next piece and the next piece. So my aim is to win as easy a battle as possible before fighting the harder ones, because you want your army to grow and have more experience before you do that. Okay? So everyone okay up to this point? So you're running a loop. So now you've run the loop blind. The kid didn't know what's going to happen, but it went from safety to safety. Now you're running the loop on purpose. The little boy has agreed to do it and knows what's coming, and it's all okay, right? You go back to the adult, and the first thing you do is you do a little bit of coaching with the adult and say, hey, how do you do? He goes, pretty good. Or you actually even lead him a little bit and say, he did pretty good, didn't he? Yeah. How do you feel about that? Well, I feel great. Are you proud of him? Yeah. He's kind of brave to do this, isn't he? Yeah. So you want to have a lot of that affect, a lot of that positive emotion kind of generally surrounding the overall thing that you're doing, right? And it's also helping build the protective instinct in the adult. Now, once you had a little chat about that, it says, well, do you notice how did it get easier? Yeah. So there's less, the emotion is less. Yeah. Well, every time you do it, it's going to get less and less until it's all gone. You realize that, don't you? Well, I guess so. Well, should we do it? Why not? Okay. 3, 2, 1, back in here, all the way to here, back to the adult. How was that? That was even easier, right? How's the emotion? Well, there's a little bit still there, but it's really small. Great. Well, it's going to keep going that way, don't you? By the way, how do you feel about the little boy for doing it one more time? He's pretty brave, isn't he? Yeah. He's doing pretty well, isn't he? Yeah. And, I've had people end up doing this loop, and actually here, the kid gets excited because he's looking forward to conquering his fear and feeling the triumph at the end of it. It happens sometimes spontaneously like that. So you might do this 3, 4, 5 times until that charge has gone. The fear has been dispersed. See how that works? Can we have a microphone down here, please? Someone?
I can imagine that even when the kid gets very excited, it can change into maybe anger or whatever, and go nuts, right?
Well, we can talk about. Well, we'll talk about anger specifically later. Oh. Here, you're looking for a resource state to get him through it, and typically it'll be like something empowering, like I can do this, and the charge is going away. Because remember, the negative emotion is disappearing more and more as this is happening on each round, because it's going from safety to safety. Right. So now he's like thinking like, I'm conquering this, right? It's like a vicious dog that's kind of snapping at you like all scared, and the more you do something, the more the dog is cowering in front of you, because you're the one who's in charge now. That's the empowering part of this process, as well as the draining of the negative energy. Does that kind of make sense? Now, you're quite right. There may be something like anger left at the end of it, because, let's face it, this may have been a really bad experience, like we talked up here in the sense of abuse, but it doesn't have to be something that bad. It could be just something like, let's say your parents didn't notice the kids putting you in the dumpster, and you feel like they should have been there to protect you. That's fair enough, right? Another person somewhere? Ah, hello.
this may be very obvious and I'm just missing it. If something happens to you as an adult, are you taking them back to a childhood time, or are you taking them back to when they felt safe before the incident and then right after the incident, but staying in as an adult?
So let's take it from the top just to get the whole process. An adult comes to you with a problem, yes? So let's say the problem is they're afraid of conflict, right? And you're doing your whole mind-bending language stuff or your blitz, and somehow it's not working. Every time you get to this point of like, you know, they see that face and they start feeling really like terrified, and you say, well, you know, what's terrific about that fight? Or you know where I'm going with this, right? But instead of anything shifting or changing or somehow it flares that terror even more. So you get more of something. And to the point where you're thinking like this whole language thing is not working for me. It actually will work. It just have to be a little bit more conniving, shall we say, in the way that you maneuver. But whilst you're building experience, you need to have some tools that'll take care of the other stuff that happens around it, right? So you now have a strong fear, strong negative emotion, right? Now you think to yourself, well, the simple solution to this is the regression. So you have a fear, which is strong emotion, and you regress on it. So you say, okay, feel that fear, go back to the first time you felt it. 3, 2, 1, where are you? Inside, outside, you know, daytime, nighttime, that sort of thing. Then you ask something along the lines of, is it the first time you felt this, or is this something new? Have you ever felt this before? Or is it like familiar, like, oh, here we go again, we've done this before, right? If it's familiar, you bounce back again. So now let's say there were 10 the first time, now there's sort of 7 or 8. You may have to bounce a second time till there were 4 or 5. You don't know, you just have to keep checking and rechecking until you get there. Now you have here, they're 4 years old, and they're in a dumpster, and someone's shouting at them, you know, angrily before they're rolling down the hill, right? So now you work on that memory. That memory is going to release the overall idea of fear when it comes to the concept of conflict. And we'll grow them up later on with other things instead. So here, they're 5 years old. Here, they're 30 years old. The presenting issue, which is fear of conflict, say in the workplace, is something that's going to be dealt with as a result, but at the end of the whole process. This is just how you get them to a point where they can release fear in that context overall. Does that make sense? So you go to the point here. Oh, someone else? Go ahead.
I understand with a fear of dogs or a single traumatic event how the adult them can go back and in a resourceful way have the conversation,
sure,
and coach and all of that. And we saw that earlier when we had that experience. But I'm wondering if a series of bad events has led to like a general sense in the adult of anxiety or PTSD or something where the adult person doesn't feel capable of coaching the younger person.
Exactly.
Do you then have to basically take time to do a blitz and whatever on the adult person to give them the resources to then coach the other person?
That's pretty much it.
Okay.
You coach the adult here, because you'll know by this stage, you'll coach the adult here in what he needs to know and what he needs to have to be able to do it. And I think, honestly, everyone that actually survives to adulthood has resources. Otherwise, they wouldn't have made it that far, right? They may not know them, and they may be well hidden, but they're there somewhere. So this is where your skill as a therapist comes in. If you have that, and that's pretty much one of the toughest cases you can find, then you just have to work a little bit harder to get the adult resourceful, to be able to set up this, to be able to let it all go, to be able to do this coaching. And then you may have to coach the adult again here, so he knows how to speak to the little kid. He might not even know how to, I don't know how to speak to a little 5-year-old. I have no idea how do you speak to a 5-year-old? I don't know. So you may coach the adult, and again, listen to him speaking to the 5-year-old, and the adult might have some really bad frames in this attempt to coach it. Like, you know, in a moment, something really bad's going to happen, and you'll be really, really scared, and it's going to affect you for the rest of your life. I mean, serious. You know, how would the adult know any better? He doesn't know, right? So some people automatically go like, this is a child, and they need to give him comfort and security. Others just don't know. In which case, you need to now coach the adult. They're not ever wrong. You said, oh, no, don't say that, because that's now adding more negative stuff into the mix. Just say, well, how about just see what happens when you tell them this. Some bad stuff's going to happen, but you're going to make it through. Because you know, this is now, I'm getting a frame from the adult, because you know that's true, right? Yes. Well, do you think it might be useful for him to know? Well, I guess. Well, tell him and find out. They tell him, and says, how was that? He goes, oh, he liked that. Well, let's do some more. Sure. Right? So now you're coaching the adult to handle that conversation. So you're absolutely on the right path. The key thing is, how do you set this thing up? Everyone clear so far? So at this point, we've released the fear. But as Fritz over here was mentioning, there could be another problem, and it's something we need to take care of. And that is, let's say, the kid's rolling down the dumpster and, the whole works. And they have a feeling, and it's right, justified, someone should have protected him. His mother should have been there, his father should have been there, and they didn't do their job. Right? Now, of course, we know that parents can't be omnipresent, and sometimes parents have bad days too and do things they shouldn't do, and you know what it is. But for a kid, they might have that sense of anger burning, saying they should have done it and it's not right. And they're right. But is that anger helping the little boy? Is anger helping the adult? All that's happening is it's fueling a slow burn that's containing the problem in the first place. So now you have someone who's not only afraid, but has an underlying anger about life as well. That's not a healthy way to live life, is it? But there's a solution to anger. Do you know what it is? Release. Right? The technical word for it, and this may start causing some issues, we'll see how this goes, is forgiveness. Now, when I say forgive, I do not mean acceptance. Right? In the Western world, because we are partly based in a revenge culture, the eye for an eye thing, we think that in order to forgive someone, we have to love them enough to accept what they did. And that's typically how people forgive. That's how we overcome the whole revenge cycle, right? But you don't need to accept something to forgive it. Basically, just letting something go, it's like it's not important anymore, right? Have you ever had like a long-standing argument with someone and you just get tired of it and say, you know what? Do whatever you want, I don't care. Now, do you accept what they're doing? Do you like it? No. But you basically have reached a threshold where you don't want to care anymore because it's just totally irrelevant. It's just a waste of your time. It's a waste of your energy. It's a waste of your thought patterns. It's a waste of your life getting yourself wound up about something that's just really not even worth thinking about in that sense. Do you see where I'm coming with this? Now remember, anger is designed to do one thing, which is what? Protect boundaries, right? See, now you have, let's take a really bad example, abuse. Little kids getting abused, right? Anger is appropriate because it's part of what can help them survive in that context. Fast forward 35 years. Does he still need that anger? Is that, if they're not in the abusive relationship, is that their parent's gone or the person's gone, is out of their life? Do they still need the anger, or is the anger just doing damage? Right? Now, it doesn't mean they were wrong to be angry in any means. It's just that it's no longer useful. It's no longer doing its job. Go ahead, GW. Do you see where I'm getting with this? This is a really clear, this is a really important distinction to make, because this is the thing that a lot of people get hung up on. You can't force people to let go of anger, but it's the thing that's actually holding them back at the same time.
Okay. You use the example of an abuse or an abuser. Mm-hmm. So often, the abused becomes now the abuser. Mm-hmm. Now that's the adult that's going back. Mm-hmm. It's an abuser mm-hmm. to coach or ratify that child that's been abused. In other mm-hmm. words, there's that cycle. How does that element come into it in working with someone to break that?
This is actually a really complex question. But here's my answer on this, and hopefully you'll track what I mean by this. There are basically, as I understand it, and if anyone here has more experience than me with abuse cases, please feel free to speak up. So I understand it. There are two kinds of abusers. Those that do it and don't care, and those that do it and really regret it afterwards, but somehow can't stop doing it anyway. Right? Now, the former will never come into your office. Go ahead.
Well, I'll let you.
Okay.
Finish.
So the former will never be in your office. The ones that abuse and don't care, you'll never see. So you don't even have to think about those, right? The ones that do abuse and care, in other words, they feel guilty and terrible and beat themselves up, but somehow end up doing it anyway, there you have something to work with. Why? Because you're working with a part of the personality that cares. And the part that's actually stuck in the negative behavior is basically just acting out the old scenario, probably because it's trying to find some kind of release from that cycle, trying to understand it by doing it in a way that, it's just maybe some messed up way of doing it. It doesn't help the person, but he's stuck in a cycle, going back to intention versus behavior. So what you end up doing is you get in touch with the person, that part of them that says, you've done it yourself, and you know that it's really bad, right? And he says, yeah. How do you feel about that? Well, I feel really terrible. Do you want him to keep having that experience? No, I don't. So how do you want him to feel? I want him to be, okay with it. I want him to be grow up strong and healthy and not have to put this behind him and not have to deal with this anymore. So is that making sense to you? So you're using that part of the personality that actually does care, and that's your leverage to get the work done. If he doesn't care, then I honestly don't know what to do with it. But then I don't have to, because I will never work with someone like that, because I'll never see them. They'll never come. I get volunteers. People who come and see you are volunteers, which means they want to change. And this is where you have the big leverage. Go ahead.
Okay, so I work with abusers quite often, and what I do is try to influence them to realize that there's other ways to see things than they're seeing. Like, for instance, a college student will get in a fraternity and he'll be hazed and go through a terrible time, and then when they get to be the senior, then they do the same thing. But there's another way of looking that a lot of people don't know. Well, if it felt that uncomfortable to you, do you really want to be a person that would hurt someone else? And and when they make that decision, no, I don't want to do this. So, because you got hurt doesn't mean you have a right to hurt someone else. You could make another decision, and a lot of people don't really realize that they have that other decision.
I think that's a great point. I mean, you get how this works. You have leverage, and as hypnotists, I think you understand how to start creating these frameworks. So you're basically allowing this conversation here to take place, and then later on, the forgiveness thing as well.